Misfits.
Hey everybody, we're back. We're live for the first time in 2024. I've been talking about the fact that Anthony Wilson was going to be joining you, but you know how Joe Day is. He can't resist but jump on anything that I'm doing. So Joe's also with us today, and we are going to be talking today about something that we kind of already, the three of us, started talking about back, 2 weeks ago for Let It Rip? Dealing with pastors, dealing with common and holy and set apart and job descriptions and a bunch of other different things. We also had kind of advertised that we were going to be having a pastor talk between the three of us on Misfits. This is not the one we intended, but it's just as important, just as good to do. And so we're going to be talking about the dynamics of pastoral relationships and trust today with Ant and Joe. Kind of a Sunday edition of Kingdom on the Road. So let us know if you're here. Let us know if you have any questions, if you have any comments about what we're going through. We're going to be hitting those up as we go through. And let's start with you. And well, actually, let's start with why we're doing this. So we had the discussion on Let It Rip about common, holy, set apart, a bunch of different words. Then about 24 hours later, maybe it was a little bit more than that. It seems like 24 hours later, I saw a post talking about how long it takes for pastors to gain trust. I had a little bit of a disagreement with the timeline it gave. Joe kind of was with me on the disagreement of the timeline it gave. You kind of like, well, I can see where he's going with it. But the post had said something about 5 to 7 years to gain trust. I had said that's a little long. Joe had said it's long. Let's start, though, with actually talking with you. Why was it that you actually were kind of in agreement with how long it takes to develop trust?
Yeah. Developing trust with pastor, congregation, it's a fragile thing. And, so I've been pastoring for 15 years. I've been mentoring pastors for probably most of that time. I sit with pastors, visit pastors, and I have those conversations with them. Even I've experienced a lot of things when it comes down to this, in the sense that there are people that can be a part of a church for 3-4 years and still not really trust their pastor, and I say that from the standpoint of I'm the kind of pastor that wants to engage and build relationship and connect. And it's still difficult for people to overcome. And this is not to say that this is a wrong thing, but some people have a lot of church hurt. They have a lot of issues when it comes down to what a pastor is, what that even means to them, what a pastor's role is in their life, what a pastor should be doing and what a pastor shouldn't be doing. And so for years, they're just coming and attending, and they're never wanting or able to get beyond, I see my pastor at church, and that's the limit of my life, as it includes my pastor. And so when I looked at the post, and I know I saw 5 years, I know it was 5 to 7 years. I thought in my estimation, 3 to 5 years actually sounds reasonable to me. 5 years may seem long, but I've seen people, like I said, that have been with the church. And this is, again, there's a lot of factors in this. So even their idea of what church is impacts their relationship with their pastor. So, right, if I think that, church is just something I do on Sunday morning, right, then my pastor is relegated to that box,
Mm-hmm.
right? You know, he's supposed to preach the message and that's it. He's supposed to answer the phone when I call him and that's it. You know, but to build relationship with them and actually get to know this person, that that can take years. There are people that it probably, you know, if we really polled some people, I'm hoping that some people really chime in so I can ask them this question, you know, even personally, you know, and I'm ready for whatever answer they give. I'm ready, you know, for whatever they throw at me. But how long did it take before you could even trust me as your pastor, trust me as as a person, because sometimes pastors aren't considered people. They're
Right.
considered, you know, this entity that speaks to you from the pulpit on Sunday morning, you know, or who prays for your family, but they're not really, you know, a person, you know. So when I looked at that post, I thought about it. It's like, you know what, 5 years seems like, you know, it could be reasonable. I don't know, 5 to 7. I would say 3 to 5, you know. And so that was my thought when I looked at it, you know, and then start to reflect on it. Because, you know, like I said, there's even people now, you know, that have been around me for years. And I'm not quite sure how much they actually trust me, you know, because there's things that they feel like they can't share or they shouldn't share or is off limits, you know, as our relationship goes. And so I'll start with that, and then we'll get into some dialogue and some questions and some objections and some back and forth and see where we go.
Yeah. So Joe, we'll go to you next before I dive in. Why was it that you were kind of in agreement? You were kind of in between Ant and I as far as the timeline. I would venture to say you're muted before you answer because you were about to answer while muted. But what? Give me your rundown as far as why you were saying what you were saying.
So, one of the big things that I've come to see, well, first off, I agree with most of what Ant said. Um, uh, Approaching this from the standpoint of being a house church pastor and being somebody who has struggled myself with my house experiencing church hurt and all of that. I get a chance to kind of see both sides of that paradigm. Um, I would say anything over 5 years at that point, you could pretty much guarantee you could pretty much well say that at that point the person's there for a reason, and that's good. But establishing a paradigm of trust beyond that point, uh, I mean, you're the reality is that some relationships you're going to have to accept are never going to be ones built around trust. They can enjoy the service, they can enjoy the people, there can be a lot of benefits and a lot of good that will bring people to a service of some kind without any of that having anything to do with trusting a pastor. Generally, in my um in my experience, I have found more often than not anything past 3 years. Some of those same things could be said. I would hear an argument that there's room for growth still past that 3 year point. That's still like, uh, I guess closer to early days. I guess, but um, generally, when you have somebody who's operating based off of a place of a lack of trust for the pastor, um the level of care that needs to be put into that relationship to either redefine the role of the pastor, redefine the role of church, show them that not every single pastor sucks, that like whatever the case may be, that care needs to go into. And maybe this is some of my cynicism coming out and all of that's going to be on display. um I would say more often than not, that level of care isn't being invested into the relationship
Yeah.
anyway, to try and develop those muscles that are lacking in the first place. I'm trying to think. I think the longest that I've seen in my context of somebody that like went from like not trusting to like finally, like I still remember the first time that they ever called me pastor. It was about 3.5 years. And just pouring into them and pouring into them and pouring into them. And about 3.5 years later, it was finally like we finally broke ground, sort of thing. But there was a lot of people who came before me that really ravaged him and his family.
Mm.
You know what I mean? And that's there's just a reality to as I have made the joke that as pastors, we are professional milk spill cleaners. We come behind other people and clean up other people's spilt milk a lot of the time. That's a huge part of the job description.
Yeah, and that's what I think part of what we already are highlighting is the fact that this conversation gets kind of messy from the side of those of us that are in pastoral ministry first. It gets messy because of the fact that depending on the context of your calling, the timelines change. You know, Joe in a house church setting has to have much deeper relationship right off the bat. And more of a traditional church setting has time for it to grow and everything like that. You know, me and my experiences being much more in community-based rebuilding, we've got to have relationships going before we even walk into the office for the first time.
Can I redefine something real quick for Sure Foundation? I don't want to
Yes.
speak for you, Ant, but knowing, but
I
that
was going to say
being
it, but go ahead.
essentially, even though currently we're in two different sides, like that's my family, so I can speak. I can speak to that church. If you walk through life at Sure Foundation disconnected from everybody, it's going to show pretty quickly. I don't know how, like, there is such an underbed, and I highlight this because like this is it's unique for the style, because most given situations with the Sunday morning model, I would say yes, like absolutely, you would be bang on the banana and all of that kind of stuff. Sure Foundation, because of the people, because of the culture, because of the environment, because of the space, just it's one of those areas where there's such an undercurrent of relationship there that you can tell it was built by a guy that took the same rubric that we found out after we started working together. We actually built our church planning models off of the same model and went from there. He just went the one route and I went the other route, essentially.
Well, but part of what you're highlighting there is part of where we're going, and why Ant is the one that I asked originally is the model of how you actually as a pastor build trust. And that is where, you know, we're gonna eventually move here. Before we do move into that, we asked on social media a couple of questions, because this is something that was we were wondering what the response was going to be, and I'm going to get to Amy's comment about that in a minute, because she already has started us into it. We asked the initial question we asked was for churchgoers to tell us yes or no, do you trust your pastor? And we weren't sure what we were going to get, because of the fact that within the Misfits community, we have a lot of different backgrounds, and especially church hurt backgrounds in the mix.
Yeah.
60% said, yes, we do trust our pastor. I was very happy to see that. But many of them also put additional comments of, we trust the pastor we are with now.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, in the past, we have trusted a pastor that ended up breaking that trust, or we had somebody that we couldn't trust at all. This is part of what we see with, Amy Fritz here from Untangled Faith. Says, it takes me a bit to trust because of experience with past leaders that was unhealthy. One pastor was actually plagiarizing every single word of every sermon he preached, including personal stories.
What?
We see these sort of things a lot. We hear about these sort of things a lot. This is what we hear in the news most of the time when we see the word pastor trending, is that somebody has done something. Either another abuse scandal has broken out, another abuse scandal is attempted to be covered up, there's plagiarism somewhere, there's insert whatever money laundering, you name it. These sort of things happen. And so the idea of what is a pastor and can you trust a pastor gets muddied and muddied and muddied. And especially when you come into communities that have had multiple churches hurting them, or pastors in the role that you now sit hurting them, building that trust becomes harder and harder to do. Which Amy did want to clarify also. She does trust her current pastor, which again means that it's fitting the trend we're seeing of people that are hurt finally finding a pastor they trust, which is a beautiful piece of what we're getting to, hopefully by the end of all of this. So, and you're already shaking your head in agreement and in disbelief, both. So we're going to start walking through how are we actually supposed to, as pastors, develop trust with our congregations. What is the key to all this? Because we did agree, for those that saw the initial post that we referenced, nothing he said in there as far as how to do it, we disagreed with at all. It was just the numbers that we were commenting on. And I can't remember who it was that posted it, or we'd be tagging him and everything like that. Not to plagiarize us, we just talked about that whole thing.
Right.
But, walk us through, how do we actually build trust as a pastor with our congregation?
Well, I think first of all, I have to know that I'm actually called to be a pastor, because that's the beginning step, I think. Because if you're just called to preach or teach, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're a pastor. Right. That might mean that you're a teacher. That might mean that a pastor is someone who is actually called to build relationship with the people who they are preaching and teaching to, beyond the preaching and teaching environment. That they're called to care about people in a way that might be uncomfortable at first. But there's this old saying that I've always heard, and I feel like it rings true. And I want to find some scriptural foundation for it. But there's this old saying that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Mm-hmm. Right? And pastors can be articulate from the pulpit. They can be dynamic teachers of the Bible. But if the people don't get a sense that you actually care about them and about their life and where they're going, then your journey to trust is already, behind the 8 ball, because, they'll just put you in that same category with everybody else who is meeting a need in their life, and they'll use you to meet the need of learning the word, but it'll never get beyond that point. So I think the first step, is, and I don't know another way to put it, but you got to kind of get your pound of flesh in that area. That they know that, hey, he's invested in me as a person, not just me as a member of his church, right? A person in the pew, that when he looks in the room, like, oh, okay, we got a nice full room of people. But do you know these people? Do you care about these people? Do you care about what happened to their grandmom? Do you care about what's going on with their kids? Do you care about these people? And so having a pastor's heart or shepherd's heart, however you want to, say that, I think is the beginning step. It doesn't, finish the process, but it's the beginning step.
Do you mind if I piggyback off of that?
Go for it.
So yeah, that's that displaying that heart, even if it's just in general. You think of it like a beacon, right? You throw that beacon up, the bat signal, if you will.
I'm glad you clarified, because I heard bacon at first and was very,
Yeah,
very
just
confused
start
where we were
throwing up
going.
slabs of bacon, just slabs of bacon everywhere. What is the matter with you? Anyway,
It is
so
dinner time. I mean,
yeah, um, and then from that point of investing in showing is the biggest word that comes to mind from that point forward is time.
mm-hmm.
Because you're going to keep, if you are called to care for folks that have had previous trauma experiences, doesn't just have to be in something as consolidated or distillated as a house church environment. It's literally, if you are stepping into a pre-established ministry or a ministry in an area that it has other churches in it or what have you. Notice these examples that I'm using are pretty all consuming and all inclusive. If you are stepping into ministry, you have to understand that you are opening yourself up to be caring for folks and for folks to walk through your door that have those trust issues.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing that you can do is invest time and understand that you can put yourself forward. Hey, how's how are you doing that your grandma's sick, or how's your dog, or how's the this or that, how the kids, how's the wife, how whatever. You may get a cold shoulder, you may get a non-answer, you may get a colloquialism, you may get not much in the way of a response, but your job remains the same. You
Mm-hmm.
invest the same. You keep investing into those people, because the gimmick is that you may not actually be the pastor that fully and completely helps them realize that not all pastors suck. You may be a footnote in the story that eventually somebody else picks up what you've done and is like, oh, okay, Pastor so-and-so, not you, but the next guy, or the next guy, whatever, the next person picks up where what you started the groundwork on, and there you go. You know what I mean?
And that's what I think what you've hit on both in both of those areas, whether you are the person or you're not,
Mm-hmm.
is another aspect of what we were talking about before, as far as the fact that we've got to actually identify what pastor is first before we can even talk about how to build trust here, because our job is not to be the one to fix it. Our job is just to be the one that is there for them at the time, whatever that situation may be. And what you're talking about there is the fact that most of our job is actually to be listening, not speaking at them, which is what everybody assumes the pastor's job is to stand up there Sunday morning and just talk a bunch.
Right.
And then make us late for dinner. That is what everybody assumes it is. But the reality is the majority of our job has to start with listening. What does this community actually need? Do they need somebody that's just going to be a church that's there for them Sunday morning, or do they need somebody that, whether they're there Sunday morning or not, doesn't matter, because there's all these other things that are needing done Monday through Saturday? And that's what, Joe, you finally were able to get on with me when this is the main point that we're really getting at. This is the Celtic versus Roman evangelism model.
Right.
That's what this is. The starting point is that we are in the community for them.
Yep.
Not that we are in the community for us, and the community needs to come be here for us.
Right.
That's the dynamic that's very hard to get within within at least white American Christianity.
No,
it's very difficult.
It's across the board. It's something that is pervasive in church culture, no matter your background, your ethnicity, whatever, even your economics. There's this idea that if we build it, they will come. If we,
Right.
that's kind of like what people are taught,
Yeah.
but they're not taught to incarnate, to actually be incarnated into the communities that they are ministering to. That they're not taught to be known at the local grocery store, to be known, by the gas, the clerk at the gas station, to be known, I do deliveries, and I specifically, purposely go to the same place all the time so that the people there know me, and I talk to them, and they help me find stuff when I can't find, and they're like, "Hey, you're back," and I'm building relationship with them, because I don't know if God wants me to minister to them. I don't know if I'm supposed to be their future pastor, but no matter what, the goal is to be a part of the community. And that's something that's kind of lost, and I think it's because it seems kind of old fashioned, that because of the power of social media, I'll just put a video out there, I'll just engage that way. I don't want to actually go to the coffee shop and meet the people in the neighborhood. I don't actually want to, and I'm not saying they don't want to, but maybe it's something that doesn't dawn on them, because we live in an environment that's so fast paced, and everybody hops in the car and drives all the way across town, and they don't walk to the corner, and go to the local store or what have you. And so I think, community becomes a buzzword, instead of an actual mission statement.
Yeah. That I remember when that dynamic as a pastor really started to take root for me, where for those of you that don't know, I've been on Misfits enough times, so most of you guys know this.
That's why I didn't even need to advertise you. People just assume you're going to show up at some point.
People just assume. It's fine. A big part, probably more so than anybody else in our network, a big part of my ministry is digital in nature. I minister and pastor folks across the country and across the world, and I love the fact that I can do that. I love the fact that technology has allowed for that to happen, and has allowed for me to be able to be a voice in other countries and to be able to help other people and all of that kind of stuff. But I remember when I was training for the race, my running partner, I was like, "Yo, we're gonna go running through the neighborhood, but I'm gonna warn you, we're gonna get stopped. We're gonna get, 'cause I just knew, I knew it was gonna happen. Hey, pastor, hey, whatever." And it was so, it was cool to watch, because I remember how I was when that first started happening, when I would go for a run, and people would, honk and wave, or I'd stop at the corner store, and the guy behind the counter knows me, and all of that, all that kind of stuff. But to watch it again through somebody else's eyes was funny. He's like, "Man, you weren't kidding." I was like, "That's just because I've been here now for 5 years. These are, this might not be my forever home, but for right now, these are my people. These are the people in a flesh and blood sense, in a brick and mortar sense. These are the people that I am called to." And so being intrinsically connected with the community that you are in for the time that you are in it changes the entire paradigm. And some people don't even realize, Ant, that quote that you threw out there is from Field of Dreams: "Build it and they will come."
Yeah,
but they don't, but I've legitimately heard that in like training seminars and like church planning groups and stuff
Business
like that.
meetings.
Yeah, build it and they will come. Well, I'm specifically speaking from the Christian sense of like church, like the church sense. Like,
Oh,
if
I
you
am
throw
too.
it
I'm
up
talking
there,
church business meetings.
right? Okay, so like you put the sign out and like, oh, people are gonna come flocking to that point, and like but if you stop and ask them, okay, so you're setting up shop in this neighborhood, right? what's the needs of that neighborhood? Do you know what's the demographics? Do you know how many families there are? Do you know how many kids do you know any of these questions, the answers to any of them? And that breaks a lot of the paradigm that church is generally built around. And thus, to get back to the thesis statement of building trust, if your model is based around the show, the presentation, we talk about how people think. It's easy to say people think, but let me ask this. How many Padres think that their gig on a Sunday is up there talking and all of that kind of stuff? Like, there's benefit in the study time, there's benefit in the preparedness, and I would argue that there's more benefit in the preparedness and the studying and all that kind of stuff than the 35 to 45 minutes that you spend in front of the congregation.
And that's where, we'll get to the question I asked pastors as well here in a little bit. But again, it's coming down to intentionality, and it's coming down to, like you were saying, time, listening, understanding. And this is, again, part of why we have to, and this is part of where what Joe was talking about, the difference between Sure Foundation and other churches. It comes down to, again, what are we saying is actually the purpose, not only of us as pastor, but of our churches? Is the church just about numbers, or is the church about discipleship? Because if it's about discipleship, suddenly time and listening and meeting the needs, both physically and spiritually, and being a part of the community, suddenly are natural pieces of what it means to be the church, instead of having to figure out ways to incorporate into what we're already doing.
Yeah. I think, I've had to go through the experience of, when we call ourselves a discipleship church, people saying, well, what does that mean? What is that? What does that mean? And when I tell them, well, that means that we actually want to do life with you, that this is legitimate life on life. We want to walk through, this journey, that we give our life to Christ. We come together by the presence and the power of the Holy Spirit. We go and do Jesus's mission together, and we support one another and help each other in doing this thing together. And so that means if I am given the position of pastor and shepherd, then I'm called to guide and help and minister to you and equip you so that you can invest in one another, and maybe invest in your community, your general vicinity, your apartment complex, your family, your job, area, that you become a missionary in your own zip code, right? Because you're trained, you have been poured into, and you have a resource. If you need questions asked or answered, if you need prayer or support for you and your family, because we're all doing this together. And so, I remember there were times where I'm like, all right, well, if you want discipleship, let me know. And there are certain individuals that, hey, I wanted to reach out to you and see if you wanted to, sit down and kind of talk through some things, and ask some questions, any questions you want about the church, about the Bible, about God, about anything, let's sit down and let's talk about that. And people are like, oh, why is the pastor want to talk to people? What, almost like, yeah, the pastor called me last week. That was weird. like, it's almost like, hey, yeah, I thought I was in trouble. Why would you be in trouble? But this is right. This is what people's interpretation of, like, there's something wrong. There was one person that said, I think they're a cult or something, because they want to talk to their members. They want to actually know what's going on in the life of their members, and they want to, be involved. Well, why are you asking your pastor for advice? He's supposed to just preach the sermon. Why are you talking to him beyond that? And it's rough, because you're thinking, wait a minute, when I'm opening up my Bible and I'm looking at the relationship between, Jesus and his disciples, the apostles and the church. They're meeting daily. They're breaking bread from house to house. They're meeting in the synagogue and in homes. That, you know, there's like this camaraderie, and like they're like, oh yeah, you're not supposed to do that. That's that's just what it says, and that's just an example. It's really not supposed to be like that. And so you become like some kind of weirdo because you want to invest in people's lives to an extent where they don't want it or they think that it's unnecessary. And so it becomes a struggle, from that point.
So that actually leads us into the question I asked pastors, and we'll get to why it leads away. Is I asked them the opposite question of, do you feel like your congregation trusts you?
Woo.
And the good thing is that the few pastors that actually were willing to respond all said, yeah, they feel like they are trusted by their congregation.
Mhm.
But part of what you were just highlighting is that I'll word it this way to make it nice. We'll just word it this way to make it nice. Churches that are intentionally that are not intentionally discipleship based, it gets a little bit weird when we start talking about these sort of things.
Yeah.
So the question then comes in, how do we overcome that kind of trust level when we don't feel like the congregation trusts us? How do we actually try to build that trust up without compromising and doing things that are what actually make people run away, such as like what Amy was talking about, where we start plagiarizing or doing the things that the big people are doing, because obviously people like that.
Yeah.
Or they'll trust that, or going the opposite direction of just shutting down completely, and that's when we start getting despots and everything else in place of a pastor. So how do we actually overcome this trust gap on the other side?
Yeah, I think it starts with, again, what is my role as a pastor, and me sticking to that,
Mm-hmm.
no matter the response or reaction, because it is, and I think Joe hit it on the head. The second piece of outside of being intentional about caring about people is giving them time,
Yep.
right? Giving them time to watch you, to assess, your behavior, to, to see, does he really care, or is it some kind of, act? Because, okay, I've been, around the, what they call it, I guess they call it the multi-level marketing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you go into those environments, they are actually taught to act that way.
Yep.
They're taught, what's the book that everybody was reading, How to Make Friends and Win with People. Was it Dale Carnegie, or whatever? Everybody was, I don't know, that might be the title, but
How to Win Friends and Influence People.
There you go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That book in that environment was like, mother's milk. Everybody read it.
Yeah.
And they and they tried to implement, but they're implementing it to build their business, to gain followers, to gain people, not to actually genuinely. And so people are going to need time, and they're going to need to see you, in an authentic, real settings.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to need to have a meal with you. They're going to need to, talk sports with you. They're going to need to, have a conversation about music with you. They're going to need to see you in ways that, are not formal from the pulpit, and see you like, okay, his character lines up. He's still the same guy, and then there can't be this leap from your conversation with them, right, one-on-one, to this whole different person in the pulpit,
Mm-hmm.
because that's going to make me not trust you as well. And so for me, I overcome that trust thing by being the same person no matter where they run into me. They run into me on the stream, I'm the same person. They run into me preaching on Sunday morning, I'm the same. They're going to see my passion, they're going to see my energy, they're going to see me pull back, they're going to see my face expressions. They're going to see me and they're going to get to know me and say, "Oh, Pastor, I caught that. You would it." Yep. And I'm saying, "Yep, you got me," because it's real. And so I overcome that by being consistently who I am in whatever environment I'm in.
So I'm gonna pull a you, Andrew, and be like, I'm gonna tweak one slight thing, Ant, with what you said, and you basically said this. I'm just busting your chops. It's time without expectation.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because you cannot walk into it with the expectation that the person's going to reach a certain point, that your relationship is going to reach a certain point, different things like that. Like just being authentically you may not be the thing that fully and completely cements that relationship. You still do it though. That's still right. Because you don't know where, Ant said, have a conversation about music, but have a conversation about boxing. Right.
Whatever. Yeah.
Like, well, I use that example because Ant and I worked together for years before we ever met face to face. And I wasn't sure what exactly I was going to get when we sat down face to face, and we both are from a part of the country where boxing is in the blood. It's just a part of the culture out here. And just being able to communicate about that established a baseline of humanity. Like, show the fact that you are a human without holding the other person to this unrealized level of expectation that you've put on them, that that doesn't belong on them. You've put that on them. If you've walked in with that level of expectation, if you do that, that other person's already hypersensitive to that. And that's going to set off every single red flag that they've got.
We're back to the word incarnational.
Yeah.
Because and this is part of where, the reason why we are having this discussion, besides the fact that it was one that we were having anyway, and so we figured we might as well do it live, was that this is something that we are increasingly dealing with, the three of us, in personal circumstances as well, is these situations where you're the pastor, so we can only deal with you in spiritual matters. We can't deal with you with other things. Or the other route of, if you're a pastor, I don't want to deal with any of the spiritual stuff, so I have to overemphasize and talk to you about the human stuff and not deal with anything else.
Yeah.
And this is where it also comes in with the stuff we talk about all the time in terms of the focus of even how we are doing evangelism and how we are preaching. Yeah. Because again, this is why we should not be doing things with a hell-centric viewpoint.
Yep.
If they only see you as the pastor that's screaming "Repent or perish" every Sunday, they're not going to want to talk to you about anything else. They're probably not even going to want to talk to you about that, if we're going to be fully honest, but they're not going to talk to you about that. If they only see you as the person that's dealing with, somebody had mentioned that the thing that on Twitter, that the thing that keeps them from trusting their pastors is the fact that whenever they see them online, all they see is culture war and nothing else. And so they don't want to trust them with anything spiritual because they don't know that there is anything spiritual going on with them.
Right.
The intentionality in terms of our time with other people, but as well as our intentionality with being genuine, is a big piece of this. And this doesn't even apply just to pastors. This is an everybody type of thing. Churches should not be places where people put on masks to go in.
There you go.
That's it.
Like, why that is so difficult. Yeah. Why that's so difficult, I don't understand. But we all have grown up, at least those of us that have grown up within the church, of the idea of when you go in, you have to have some sort of standard met before you walk into the building. Whether that's on your face or the clothes that you're wearing or, whatever it might be, there's some kind of standard. And if that is not you, you're not going to, one, be in a place where you're going to be able to focus enough to worship. But two, you're also not going to be able to make real connections with people because you are not your real self while you're sitting there.
So, Andrew, I'm going to jump in here. I saw you, Joe wanted to jump into the two things. I'm going to say these two things real quick. One is recent. Actually, I'll go with the one that was from way back. I saw G Berry had chimed in on here.
What's up, G Berry?
I became G Berry's pastor over a 99 at Jersey Mike's. That's when he was like, you know what? You my pastor. And you say, well, what is a 99? Jersey Mike's, y'all better shoot me some royalties or something. 99 is on the how places have the menu. It's not
the order number. Yeah.
Yes, it's not on the menu. This is not on the menu. Only if you go there regularly and you're about the 99. And so when we ordered the 99, he's looking at the menu. He's like, where's the 99 at? I said, trust me, I got you. I got you. We sat down and we had a 99 together. And he's like, man, this is so good. And it goes back to the authentic, being yourself, getting out of, this expectation, that you've got to meet this super high standard, and that it's just, everything has got to be this ridiculous, high bar that you set. I give that example. There he is. Yep. There he is.
You can make your checks out too.
Yeah. And number two, one of my guys, he was at church today. He's an individual that expressed to me a while back that, Sunday mornings is just not his thing. He just like, man, I don't, and so he comes to men's group on Thursday nights regularly. He's faithful at men's group. Doesn't really come Sunday mornings, but every now and then, he's come a little bit more lately. He came and enjoyed the service today, and he said to me afterwards, when we sat and we talked for probably about an hour afterwards, because that's what we do in men's group. So we're just being who we are, right? And so we're sitting, we're talking, and he says, hey man, I wanted to tell you something. I was like, well, what's going on? Because he had said, I'm done, and I'm walking out the door about 3 times, and then started another conversation. Every time he said, this is the last thing I'm gonna say. He said, man, I felt good being at church today. That weird thing of whatever I was feeling, I don't feel that no more. Mm-hmm. I don't know really what it was and what it was about, but it just really felt good being there, talking to people, seeing people, he said it really felt good. And I looked at him and I said, man, this is what I'm talking about. This is what I'm talking about. That this is not the destination. This is just a part of our community coming together, and when a person says, I'm just going to come on this day because it feels better. I learn more. I feel like it's better this way. I don't mess with them. I don't demand, well, you need to be here on Sunday mornings if you're going to be a member. Mm-hmm. I don't do that. And I know that's probably other pastors are probably cringing hearing me say that. But I don't do that. If all he wants to do is come to men's group on Thursday nights and fellowship and be with the men, then that's it. He didn't have to be a Sunday go to meeting, member. So when he shows up on a Sunday and says, man, it felt good to be here. I'm like, that's what it's supposed to be, because this is building something. And this young man, I'm the only pastor he's ever known. I baptized him as a little kid. I did his wedding. I'll probably do his children's dedication, whatever, when they have kids. That's the kind of relationship I have with him. And so he feels okay coming to me, talking to me. There's times where he just calls me and say, hey, pastor, I just wanted to call you and ask you something. And he does that. And There's no appointment. There's no, well, you got to call me at, this time because my work hours are, I don't have those, but at the end of the day, when we're talking about this, how to trust your pastor thing, there's got to be an openness from my side to allow a person to go through whatever that process is and not restrict them to this or that. And they've got to be willing to say, okay, I'm going to give this guy a chance to be a human being. And when you see that, I think then there's the ability to build something. And so, this is a topic that I'm kind of passionate about, because I feel like, like Joe was saying, we built Sure Foundation in my living room, eating meals together, kids running around, that
and it shows, and it shows. Yeah, it was a wild experience to step out there and I was just home. Just most of the people I'd met through the live stream. G Berry was a guy that I met through the live stream and all of that kind of stuff. Sat down, had dinner with him and T from another guy from our network. That, and all that. One of the things that I feel compelled to say, because I wouldn't have necessarily been, prior to my experiences, passionate about this thing. Wouldn't have necessarily been one that I would have. This wouldn't have been something that I had a dog in the fight about. And then a year ago, I made a choice, and the last year of my life has been fascinating. But stepping forward into the pastoral context and staying resolute about, I will not wear a mask. I will not be that guy. Not every single Sunday, every single time you step in front of the microphone, it's not the time to start dumping out your bags of trash all over the pulpit and all that kind of stuff. Tact. There's tact and timing all the time. There's tact and timing. But that you can still be tactful. You can still have good timing and not be fake.
Yes.
And I have come to understand that it will test the parameters of whether or not you have been given the gift of a pastor's heart. If you step forward and say, I'm not going to be fake about this, because your colleagues are going to call you into question. Your contemporaries are going to call you into question. Some of the members of the pulpit will love it. Some of the members of the congregation rather will love it. They will love the authenticity and all of that kind of stuff and vibe with it. Other ones will not trust you because you are authentic. Because you are, and I thought at first that was a thing about age, and there's a portion of it that you step into certain contexts, in your 30s with a blue beard and all this kind of stuff. It's gonna put some people off, but it's really that factor of, I am fully and completely authentically me, that really is off-putting to some. Love it.
He came prepared, huh?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
He's been on here enough. I've got everything saved for him. So
yeah. It's but I too find myself now passionate about how, for those of you that have been given the gift, the holy responsibility of the pastorate, how are you tending to your flock? And I also now look at other pastors and I'm like, oh man, you're a pastor? Oh, I know you've had your teeth kicked in. Like just the reality of it. I know that you have gotten your giant hind parts handed to you on a silver platter more than once. But the reality is that if we are going to step forward in full faith, expressing the character, the unchanging, unfailing character of God, oh, how can we expect to be able to do that effectively from behind a mask?
Mhm.
And I'll be the first one to admit, this is the thing. If there's any one thing that I can point to that says this is the reason why I don't fit in with most of my contemporaries, why I am not really somebody that other people are like, oh, hey, come pastor here. Hey, come tend to the. It's because I'm this is me. Like this is
Mhm.
this is me in completely and totally. You know.
And that's where, this is actually where the I guess the actual heart of the initial question here with what do you do when they don't trust you as pastor
Right.
is when it's you, not when it's you, not the position, it's
Right.
you that they don't
Mhm.
trust, but you being you is what the outside community trusts. How do we walk that line?
Yeah, that's a good
Mm.
question.
It's a good
And
question.
yeah, and unfortunately, this is a question that I'm asking out of experience.
Yeah.
Because I've been in churches where me being me was what the congregation didn't want to trust as pastor,
Right.
but me being me is why the community called me their pastor before the people in the pews did.
Right.
And Andrew, I think that's because of your context that you're coming from, and I think you'll go into that deeper. But one of the things that I was blessed to experience is that a lot of the people who are a part of our congregation, I met them in the community,
Mm-hmm.
and then they came up. So they met me in that context, right? They didn't meet me as there was a church on the corner, and um, or I was brought in to an environment that was already set. I was a part of building that environment. I was a
Mm-hmm.
part of engaging these people. And I can go through story after story of the individual moments, right? Where they engaged me outside of church before, as far as the gathering, right? As far as the gathering together. And that's what, built, this camaraderie, this eventual trust. I go back to even, a guy like G Berry. That's why I do what I do. That's why I'll go to lunch with a guy and sit with them for a couple of hours and let's
Mm-hmm.
talk, because that was the way Sure Foundation was built. It was built in these relationships that were outside of a formal gathering. And then we came together and started studying the word together and doing quote unquote church together. I don't even know a better way to say that, but I hope you get what I mean. Doing that aspect together. Whereas it seems like in a lot of your situations, you're coming into established communities, bringing something that they're like, well, how do we relate to this guy? And if I was brought into a situation like that, I probably would be received the same way, you know. But what I would do is I would, start meeting with individuals,
Mm-hmm.
taking guys to lunch. Let's have a cup of coffee. Let's, hey, would you like to know more about who I am? And depending on the type of person, that could really stretch you out of your comfort zone, because you're saying, okay, I've got to open the drawbridge and let them in, and they may come in still closed off, but I've got to be willing to let them in and let them sniff around, like, we check this out, and kind of like, but hey, I've got nothing to hide. Come on in, have a meal, come by the house, or whatever stuff that when we're talking about the common,
Right.
conversation,
Right.
people would say, oh no, you don't invite people to your house. You don't do that as a pastor. You got to stay, separate from the flock because you got to be holy. You got all that kind of crazy stuff. And you wonder why people take so long to trust you? Well, it's because you're so closed off from them. And then, like Joe said, after a while, it's not about building trust. It's about, I trust this person to preach the message.
Mm-hmm.
I trust this person to bring the word. I don't need anything more than that from them.
And that's what part of what you're looking, or you're talking about there, is where I was hoping to be able to go, is the fact that now we are into, we talked a little bit about this during Let It Rip. We've talked a lot about this just in chat settings and in discipleship settings between the three of us and everything else, is that we are now into the part where, unless you are within a pastoral calling, what we're about to say is not going to make sense, because it sounds like we're now backtracking from everything that we just said earlier on in the stream. Because in order to do what you were just talking about, for some, that means that we now are going to have to deny part of ourselves in order to reach these people that are sitting here. I may be an extreme introvert, which is why I don't like to go out and eat with people. But this may be what I need to do in order to reach this person.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The key to that, though, is what we've been saying this whole time, is that it still has to be done with intentionality.
Yes.
You are there for that person, not just so that you can check another person off your box of, okay, I had lunch with them and now I can go back and cry and be ashamed that I've talked to people.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so I guess the question is the other side of that discussion, though. And this, again, is where we were at earlier on when we were talking about what the actual role of the pastor and what the actual role of the church is that when it seems like the community outside and the community inside are coming to a head and warring over who is actually going to be their pastor, how do we navigate the trust side of this discussion if, in order to be trusted by those outside, you have to feel at least like you are not trusted by those inside? How do we actually navigate that? I'm just curious to see what your guys' answers would be.
Joe, you want that one?
He's now debating whether or not he should have actually gotten on or not.
Good.
Because I can talk about it. Yeah, I think, again, being a pastor has to be something more than just what I do on Sunday anyway.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I shot this out to TC. I was hoping that he would get on here, because this is a conversation that me and him have a lot, is that I am that no matter where I am. Mm-hmm. And so when I come to the church or I come to the gathering, the person that I am is the same person, as I said, that I was outside. And when these two are in conflict, it's because there's some misunderstanding of my role. Mm-hmm. And I have to do a better job of teaching on my role. I can't just do the job of pastoring. I actually have to teach on pastoring. And that was something that I remember having to do. It was like, okay, I'm going to have to explain to people what pastors do and who they are according to Scripture, because maybe they don't understand who I am and what I'm doing and what my role is in their life. And as a pastor, and it would seem like, no, you don't have to do that. Yes, you actually do. You actually have to do that. And I'll say this from a parent standpoint. There were times where I had to sit my kids down and say, this is my job as a parent in your life. This is what I'm supposed to do in your life. I'm not supposed to just put a roof over your head and clothes over your back. That's not parenting.
Right.
That's providing, that's giving housing, but the shelter down the street can do that. A boys and girls home can do that. My job is actually to guide, to nurture, sometimes to protect you, from yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are going to be times where my relationship with you is tenuous because, like, hey, that's a bad decision.
Right.
But I'm still going to love you. I'm still going to be there for you. And so sometimes you're going to have to actually explain, especially if I'm taking over. Let's say I'm taking over a new congregation, right? I'm going to want to go to the fundamentals. Do you understand the relationship between the pastor and the congregation? What is my role? I might even do a series on the pastor's role. I know it probably sounds like, well, why? Everybody knows that. No, they don't.
No, they don't.
No, they don't. They actually don't. They have an idea. They have their own concept of it. But if we go into scripture and I begin to walk through, that's why, shameless plug, I did this ebook on developing a pastoral perspective, because I did it so that I can use it and teach from it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really a book that you kind of read. It's a book that you kind of
It's a
learn
manual.
or teach through,
It's a
versus a
manual
book
more
that
than a
you do.
book. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's built for like a 12-week course in just, hey, let's just talk about what the
Right.
role of a pastor is, and now see it from a pastoral perspective. And I think the congregation as well as pastors need to be reminded of what is the perspective of a pastor and from scripture. What are we supposed to be doing versus, okay, he's a good preacher.
Yeah. And the one emphasis point that I would put, the one exclamation point that I would put is to go back to the analogy of the parent. When you're guiding, you're doing it regardless of what the reaction of the person you are guiding is going to be.
Yes.
And generally, if there is a breakdown in understanding of what the role of the pastor is, because I agree with Ant that if there is a disconnect between how you're seen in the community and how you're seen in the congregation, or if any of those things are like in conflict, it does tend to come either down to the individual, that they are different in the community than they are in the church, or a fundamental lack of understanding about the pastor's role within the church, but the church's role within the community as well. And squaring that circle is not always something that's invited. It's not always something that's welcomed. You still need to do it, and you still need to stay the course and be the role that you are called to be if you are going to step into that responsibility and answer the call. Even if that means that you're setting yourself up for conversations that people are not going to appreciate, or conversations that people may react out of a place of immaturity about. And that I squaring the circle of a baseline of everything, that's yeah, a lot of what I have to say is yes to what Ant said. But the thing we got to remember, though, from both sides, especially if you are a pastor listening to this, do not walk in with any measure of expectation that just because you've gotten everybody on the same page, that's going to cure what ails your situation. That, if anything, it may end up creating tension in spots that you didn't even necessarily see coming, because you may say biblically this is the role of the pastor, but that doesn't account for what they want the role of the pastor to be in their life, or in their community, or in their context, or in their situation, or things like that. For every person like April in the comments, who's like, yeah, those three men that stand at the wall for a shore foundation, those three men are the real McCoy. Those are three guys that are genuine dudes, good, bad, and indifferent.
Yeah.
But for every person like April, who's like, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, that's great. You end up with somebody else who is operating out of a place of lack of trust. I see somebody walking around right now who's scared of her own shadow, it would seem, because pastors are falling left and right, because pastors are coming out and getting drug out on the carpet left, right, and center, and all of that kind of stuff. And I see her like, where can I go? Where can I? But if you're operating out of a place of a lack of trust, it doesn't matter what are you looking for.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if you're operating out of a lack of trust, anybody can fall. Any one of us can fall.
Right.
But that's why this whole thing needs to be dynamic. That's why you can't have a simple, straightforward conversation about this, because it's people. And people are weird. People are messy. People are complicated. Having relationships with people and helping people and guiding people and all of that kind of stuff is weird and messy and complicated. It just is.
And that's why we're back to what we said originally. And that the key to what our role is as shepherds is we're back to discipleship.
Mm-hmm.
Because the idea of what is my role compared to what your role is something that should be covered within a discipleship setting. Let me explain to you where I am coming from, both in terms of my story, which is the genuineness side, and also my calling in terms of what God has called me to do.
Mm-hmm.
And now part of my calling is you tell me what you need from me. How can I get you to the next step to where either you are now becoming Paul to somebody else, or I can now call you Barnabas?
Yeah, Andrew, I'm gonna add this to that. I'm not gonna take away from what you said. I'm just gonna add on to it. The way I see discipleship is one-on-one, small groups, and the larger congregation.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like you need all of those to have a well-rounded understanding of the church and what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, on one-on-one, and like I said, I'm close to our congregation, so there's a lot of people I know their individual stories, and at times I share my individual story with them if it is applicable to the conversation that we're having. Mm-hmm. So you had talked about that, Joe, tact, right? Mm-hmm. And timing, right? So if I'm sitting one-on-one with the guy, we may have a guy conversation, but I'm very tactful in presenting certain things because maybe this guy needs to hear how human I am, right, in this setting. And so, like you said, in that one-on-one setting, I may share that. In a small group, our men's group, I consider that kind of a small group. Guys are able to be vulnerable. That's why I never record men's group, and I never will, unless, I never will, never plan to, because there are times where men need to get vulnerable and say things. And I'm like, I don't want that recorded. I don't want that, so, people are like, man, do you record men's group? Like, no, I don't. Because I don't know, a guy may need to talk about something that's very difficult, and we need this to be a safe place. We need this to be a place where they don't feel like their business is going to get out all over the place. But that's building, this connection in a small group where now these guys, when they do see each other in the large group, like, that's my guy. That's my guy. I'll watch the embrace. I'll watch the way they connect to each other. And people see that in the room like, wow, these people have a great connection with each other. But that connection was built in the small group environment, because we're just taking time with each other. The women's group is the same way. They come together. I'm like, yeah, this is, and then when we come into the full gathering, these relationships were strengthened by the one-on-ones and the small groups, and they're not a program. They're just, hey, let's get these folks together. I meet with the young adults in our church. Like the pastor, the senior pastor meets with the young adults. Yes, I do. and I'm passionate about meeting with them because they are an important part of our congregation.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of churches that the pastors that I've talked to, the group that we have that is very full and vibrant, that group is missing from their church. That group is, but they're also very interesting to handle. They're a fun group to handle as well. And so you've got to have some flexibility to even be able to handle them. And I see why a lot of churches don't have that 18 to 33 or 35 group in there, because you've got to be willing, to give them some leeway when it comes down to certain things and walk them through it and let them mature right before your eyes. Right. So I think, discipleship, when we say these words like discipleship, a lot of churches, discipleship is a program.
Mm-hmm.
It's a 12-week course. It's not hey, I'm going to walk with you as long as you're here. And even if you leave, you need me, I'm here.
And
one of our guys,
last...
and I'll say this and I'll shut up. One of our guys just came through town. We had him when he was a teenager. Now he's an adult. He's got kids. He's got a wife. He's got a house. He's got a mortgage. He's a grown man now. But he was traveling, and when he comes through, he's like, I gotta go back home. I gotta go to my church home. And he came through, and he's a musician, and he kind of blessed us with his musical talent. His beard is almost as long as Joe's. He's got a nice long red beard, and just a wonderful guy. But he said, man, I had to come home. And he stayed for both services because he knew that maybe first service, he was going to miss somebody, and he needed to stay for second service because there was people that was going to want to see him. And that's exactly how it went. And people loved on him, like, oh, that's so-and-so. Oh, man. And I'm like, that's what this is all about.
Mm-hmm.
These are relationships that I will have till I'm gone. Not just you showed up at church, I was your pastor. Anyway.
Well, and that's part of what, the second part of where we were going with it is that if we are actually talking about the actual role of a pastor, like we've been saying, and the actual attitude of a pastor and the way that it is shown throughout the scriptures, then when we have these sort of headbutting situations, but we are doing things in a discipleship manner, we are able to say when somebody comes and says, what I need you to be as pastor is something that I cannot do, then we should be able to say, like you said, I can still be your pastor when you need me, but let's find somebody for you that can actually fulfill what it is that you are looking for. Because it can't happen here.
And and that means that you need to understand that it's not, and there's a lot of layers to this, and I won't belabor the point by going into every single layer of how this concept affects the entirety of this conversation. But there's this level of, we need to not approach this like we are on a team. Like, it's this team versus that team. If you come to my church, you're on my team.
Yeah.
And all of those kinds of things, and get out of that mindset and get into the mindset of, look, because of situation, because of circumstance, especially to get back to the thesis statement of the episode, how you deal with with situations of people who have a hard time trusting. Sometimes the answer is you are not the right person.
Right.
And part of loving on people is saying, well, wait a minute. I know solid teaching, solid foundation, good fundamentals, the whole 9 yards. They're, across town. you may, and that personality that may pass the vibe check. That may be a personality that is more attuned to this person, the situation, the circumstance, where you may have an easier time being able to, you know, get involved and have a church family.
Mm-hmm.
Then you send that person off to a place where they're going to be better. They're going to be better equipped and better fed and all of that kind of stuff. That doesn't make you less than. That doesn't make your church less than. That doesn't mean that you're fraternizing with the enemy by sending somebody over the other team or any of that kind of nonsense. That just means you love that person enough to say, I'm not the right leader for you.
And that is where we get into, again, the whole idea of if we are identifying with our congregation what our role as a pastor is. This is what my ministry is. This is what I am gifted in.
Mm-hmm.
When somebody else comes and says, well, I need this gifting.
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
And these are my giftings.
Yeah.
Then we are able to say, okay, then if these are your giftings and you do not see them being able to be used here, we will find you a place where you can use those giftings, because maybe this is what the time that it is that God has destined for you to go, quoting Paul out of 2 Timothy 4, to go and fulfill your ministry now.
Yeah.
You've sat here, you've trained, you've listened, you've developed, you've discipled, but now it does not fit. Maybe it doesn't fit because of the fact that you are now called to go do something greater. And saying it in that I use those words intentionally because that is what we are actually trying to communicate. It's not a, you don't fit here, so get out. It's a, oh, you don't fit here, well, let's figure out where you do fit.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a benefit. It's not a the pastor that I sat under as an intern, we just saw this play out on Facebook a few weeks ago. Somebody new was moving to that area and was asking for recommendations for a church. So you can imagine there were 350 comments, everybody commenting, well, you should come to my church, come to my church, come to my church. There were 2 comments that were actually helpful in there. One of them was from the guy I sat under. And his comment was something like, this is what our church is about. This is how I preach. We'd love for you to come and try it out for a couple of weeks. And if you don't like it, I will help you find one that fits what you are looking for. I know all the pastors. I know all the ministries. Let us help you find the place that is the best fit for your family. If it's with us, great. If it's not, great. Right. You need to be where you can be fed and where you are going to be able to go out and do the work that God has called you to do as well. That is what a shepherd does.
Yep.
And that is what should bring about a trust relationship with the people you are shepherding.
Yeah.
But that only happens when we actually are willing to humble ourselves enough to recognize what our job actually is.
And I'm going to add to that. I was out in Jacksonville for Christmas, visiting family. And while I was out in Jacksonville, I got to hang out with one of our guys that was a member of our church for a while, who moved to Orlando. He drove up from Orlando and spent a couple of days with us in Jacksonville. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because we're talking about how do you trust your pastor? Well, when he got to Orlando, we spent, 6 to 8 weeks, together through Zoom, finding him a church.
Mm-hmm.
We actually went back and forth. We pulled up the map. We talked about it. We're like, okay, he's going to visit this church this week and he's going to check it out. We're going to talk about that one. We're going to suggest another one. We're going to do our research. And we did research together to find him a church. He's got a church now that he likes, but he still is on the prayer line, at our church in the morning. Like I said, went out there to visit. He came up from Jacksonville, which is about a 2-hour drive. Came up from Orlando to Jacksonville, which is a 2-hour drive, spent a couple of days, got an Airbnb around the corner from us, came and we did a men's group there because we had, my brother-in-law, my son was there. So we did one of our men's groups there, did a study. We hung out, we played games, we went to breakfast together. And this is a guy who is, you know, in a whole different city, but we built a relationship. We built a relationship. And I say that because this is actually who I am. I don't pretend to be this person. I actually am this person. But this is not always an acceptable version of a pastor. I'm just being honest. This is not always, people would say, well, that's why your church is not growing big, because you're too common with the sheep, right? That would be their critique. Oh, why? That church has been over on that corner for 15 years. And you would think that would be a good thing. But for somebody else, they're like, well, why haven't you grown to a bigger building? Why haven't you moved here? How come you don't have a television program? And how come you're not doing, because I'm too busy discipling sheep. I'm too busy working with individuals to pop my head out to go think, oh, let me get on TV.
Right.
That's not the goal. The goal is, like you said, to nurture, to guide, to protect, to walk with people. And so in walking with people, I don't necessarily just to go after my own whatever, people think I should be doing. And I do that unapologetically. I'm actually totally firm on the fact that, hey, I don't need all that. I never signed on and said, oh, we're going to be a mega church. I never said that.
And that's one of the things that I've come to like. It's a culture and an ethic that was always there, but what was already always there kind of got highlighted for me that man, I would rather grow deep than wide.
Yes.
Just generally speaking, like I would rather have really deep and rich relationships within my church, not just all with me or all with the pastors, but with each other, like the entire body, rather than being, 200, 300 strong, 1,000 strong, whatever, or being like this big dynamic presence. Because here's the thing, like, when you have those kinds of relationships, even in a church that's like 60, 70 strong, the impact will make other churches look at them and be like, yo, I thought they were like huge with what they're able to do. Yeah. I thought they were huge.
Yes.
and it's just stunning the amount of impact that can happen.
Yes.
Even with the small church. You don't need those numbers in order to be effective. And I would argue that it's easier to be effective when you are smaller with the right culture.
The size is relative when we're talking about churches, because a big church in some communities is a tiny church in others.
Right.
Yep.
And like the impact is much more of what we should be looking at in terms of, is this church quote unquote successful? And that's both impact within the body itself. Is there actual growth and discipleship happening? And then impact outside of that, is that manifesting itself in the love of neighbor out in the community with the actual neighbors that we have down the street?
Yeah, Andrew, there's a guy, Minister Mike. I have breakfast with him on Tuesday mornings, every Tuesday morning. And on Tuesday mornings, we sometimes it's ministry, sometimes it's not, sometimes we're just talking. Sometimes we're talking about, he's a Bronco fan, so sometimes we're talking about the Broncos. Sometimes we're talking about my Eagles, how they suck right now. But sometimes we're just talking, right? And one of the things that Minister Mike told me, he said, man, I got to tell you, when I first, heard you speak, I thought for sure that when we visited your church, it was going to be as big as Kmart. It was, it was like, he's like, I thought for sure I was getting ready to go and it was going to be this big, gigantic, huge church. And he said, we almost didn't come back because we couldn't find it. He said that we looked and we're like, it can't be over there. Maybe it's in this Kmart somewhere. Maybe it's over. He found out that it was over, where we're positioned, because I don't know if it was, Minister Tim or one of the guys looked out saying like, hey, are you looking for the church? They was like, yeah. And then he said, when he visited, I wasn't there. Our other pastor, Joe Hill, was speaking that Sunday. And so he said, well, I'm going to come back and check it out. Maybe he'll be here next week. Then next week, I wasn't speaking either. TC was speaking. Finally, he came and I was there. And he said, man, you won't believe this, man. We almost did not come here, because we were expecting it to be the size of the mall from the impression that they got. And I was like, man, but like you were saying, Joe, when you impact people, people will think that, whoa, this has got to be some huge church.
Yeah.
And like you said, Andrew, size is relative.
It is.
Size, if you look at the statistics, I think it's 90 to 95% of churches are less than 100 members. There's only 5% of churches that are actually considered large or mega church.
And that I think that was pre-COVID.
Yeah.
The numbers you were looking at.
Pre-COVID. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But and so this is what, as we close down here, if nothing else, what you hopefully are hearing from all of this is that if you want to actually figure out, as a pastor, what should I be doing if I want to actually gain the trust of the people that I am called to serve? Be genuine.
Mm-hmm.
Be the person God has called you to be.
Yep.
And then do exactly what Jesus told Peter to do, which is go feed the sheep.
Yep.
It is actually that simple when we actually let it be that simple. It's when we try to complicate it that we get all of these different things that we've talked about as well, in terms of why there were so many people that said, yes, I trust my pastor now, but can't trust the people that I came in contact with before. Because when we overcomplicate it, we cause people to not be able to see the Jesus that we are representing.
And Andrew, I would say when you feed them from the actual trough with your hands, not off an assembly line.
Right. That, and don't have some kind of expectation that you're not going to get bit by a sheep. You ever get bitten by a sheep? It hurts. Like I've gotten bit by a sheep. It hurts. So just don't walk in with the expectation that every sheep is gonna just walk up, be fed, and that's it.
Mm-hmm. So, Joe, where he's at. He's all over the place, and he's doing stuff just about every day, depending on what channel you're on. Buddy Walk with Jesus is the big one. You can find that buddywalkwithjesus.com. I was on last week. I am also on half the episode this coming week, as well as, and Ann's daughter is on for the entirety of this coming week's episode as we're finishing up going through the book of Esther. Joe, where are you going after that?
So I am after the group conversation. I'm going to be having a conversation with a Messianic Jewish doctor who is going to be coming on to discuss the book as we wrap up Esther. And then after that, we're heading into Acts for the Acts project, breaking down the book of Acts and going in deep. For those of you that know what we did for the Matthew series, expect something similar for Acts. So,
and then Well, we'll just go to Ant first. Ant, they should know you by now, but some people don't. So tell people where they can find out you and love and all about Love Thy Neighbor and what you guys are doing over there.
Well, yeah, we're on YouTube, we're on Instagram. Most people will know me because of my morning or daily prayers that we post on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and then the lives that we do on Facebook. I have multiple pages, and so a lot of you are subscribed to multiple pages. We have the Love Thy Neighbor page, we have the Anthony Wilson, page, but we also have daily motivation. And so forth and so on. So look up Anthony Wilson to find me. And when you look up Anthony Wilson, a lot of my stuff will come up. If you Googled me, a lot of my stuff will probably come up. Books, YouTube, Facebook, all those good things. On YouTube, it's Anthony Wilson at Anthony Wilson 2273 at Anthony Wilson 2273. That'll pull my direct YouTube up, and I got a ton of stuff going on there. These guys are on there with me for different shows. We got a new show, Monday Motivation, featuring young man Kavan Smith. That show is actually starting to take off, and we're getting ready to start bringing on people for interviews on that. And so maybe some of these guys might end up on there because what we're going to be doing on there is that it's a Monday morning encouragement. We cover the weekend. We talk about what's happened in our weekend. We give some type of word of encouragement, and then we have kind of a 10-minute, I guess you would call it a sermonette or encouraging word at the end. And so we'll be looking for guests to be a part of that conversation and then give that encouraging word at the end to the listeners. And so if I reach out to you, get prepared, for a 10 or 15-minute homily, that you can, encourage people with. And it's kind of a different style of show, but we're doing it just to get Monday morning energy and moving. And Kavan is great. He's a natural. If you haven't checked it out, check out Monday Motivation.
Awesome. And if you want the three of us, Friday mornings, 9:30 Eastern, Kingdom on the Road, we go through, just depends on the season as far as what we're actually doing. For it's been about, not a full year, has it, since we started the Old Testament?
Probably been about 9 months.
Yeah, I was going to say 8 or 9 months. Yeah.
So, currently we are walking through the Old Testament. We just got to Exodus this week. Well, I guess, 2 days ago. Just got to Exodus. It should speed up a little bit now that we're into more of the rest of the Old Testament. Hopefully it may speed up a little bit, but you never know with the three of us. You've seen how that goes. So check that out Friday mornings at 9:30 Eastern. And then you can also find some combination of the three of us and Pastor TC for Let It Rip. Joe, what's going on with Let It Rip?
So Let It Rip is a weekly show where we talk about hot takes, topical things, discussion points, things like that, and break them down from a biblical perspective.
Right. And again, Saturday mornings, 9:30 Eastern. Misfits wise, again, if you haven't already checked out, the new website is up and running, ministrymisfits.com. Same URL, different site. The guest portals are still up, a little bit easier to navigate, a little bit more mobile friendly now, since we didn't realize how unmobile friendly it actually was. But it's all up. You can find all of Ant's stuff there. You can find all of Joe's stuff there. There's information on there about the upcoming stuff with the entire network, both whether that's the Overwhelming Victory Radio Network or whether it's the network that has yet to be named because they have apparently vetoed the name I gave it. So if you want all of that, check all that out. We'll be mentioning it throughout. If you want to support, patreon.com/Ministry Misfits. All the stuff on there, extra episodes, backstage access to things like this to be able to ask questions. The Bible studies that the Galatians say we already did is up there. The upcoming one on Daniel will be there as well once we figure out scheduling for all of that. We are going to hopefully be continuing these types of conversations here over the next few weeks. dealing with these sort of things that are just we have commonized, to use TC's language, different things within Christianity that now make it very difficult to have discussions about, because we no longer have a good understanding of what it actually means, whether that's being a pastor, like we talked about today, and we talked about on Let It Rip a couple weeks ago. Next week, we're going to be talking, I don't remember if it's the one that we're going to be talking about what it means to have enemies, or if it's the one where we're going to talk about what it actually means to be a church in this sort of a setting as well. That's coming up the next couple of weeks. Brandon should be back here in a couple of weeks as well, talking a couple of different things. So, Joe,
So
you
what you're saying is,
Dad.
yeah. So what you're saying is, for the "What is the Church" episode, I'll see you guys soon. And that's what we've established. I'll be back for that
We'll
one.
see. We'll see. So if you want to actually know who is going to be on for that one, Joel Bowman is coming back, as well as Dr. Brian Hudson are both coming in to have this discussion as far as what do we actually mean when we talk about the church being the church, and today in a world that just doesn't get it. Joe, Ant, thanks for jumping on. All of you that commented, thanks for coming on. Oh, April gave us another one. Let's see. Went to a church that only knew me because of my dad. Sure Foundation knows me because of me, and I trust them because of that, which is a testimony to the work you've been doing, and the work that the other pastors there at Sure Foundation, as well as in many ways the work that Joe does as well, is a testament to that as well. So we are very glad, all of you that have responded the past week, about finally finding a church where you trust the pastor and the pastor trusts you. That's a very good thing. We are very excited to hear that you have found that, and we hope that that continues on, and we will see the rest of you next week.